So we're going to quick over some daily factoring practice. So after you've tried these, let's go compare our answers. So this is the 4 problems that you were assigned. I'm going to do each problem on a bigger page. Here's the first problem, 6x squared plus 4x. So we notice there's 2 terms. My biggest thing I'm going to check first. My go-to method is the GCF method. I do notice that the numbers 6 and 4 have a GCF of 2. And I notice that x squared and x each have an x in common. So their GCF is 2x, in which case 6 divided by 2 is 3, x squared divided by x is just x, and then 4x divided by 2x is just a 2. So there's our answer for that one. Letter B here, we see that there's 3 terms. I'm going to check for a GCF, but it doesn't exist, which is unfortunate. So then I do notice that my A value is 7, my B value is negative 15, and my C value is negative 18. So here I have to use the method where my leading coefficient is not 1. So in regards to trying to get 2 things that would multiply together to be a 7, my only options there are a 1 and a 7. Now when it comes to the minus 18, it could be a 1 and an 18, a 2 and a 9, or a 3 and a 6, and I'll worry about that sign later. What I do know though is if I'm going to factor this, the numbers in front of the x's, when they multiply each other, that's where we're getting our x squared from. They have to be a 7. There's only one way to do that, 7x and 1x. And then I know that the other numbers have to be filled in with factors of 18. Now, I'm trying to get to negative 15, so in my head, I see a 21 and a 6. So if I get a 7, let me write it with different colors. If I could get the 7 and the 1 to multiply by the appropriate numbers, what I see is 7 times 3 would give me a version of 21, and then therefore I'm using this pair here, so the 6 would go here. So 7 times 3 would be 21, 1 times 6 would be 6, and if I want them to be a negative 15 when they add up together, that means this must have been negative, and the 7 was already positive, so the 3 must have been negative. So I'm using negative 3 and positive 6. The only place that the 7 is going to be multiplied besides the 1x is right here. So I got to put a negative 3 there, and our other number was just a positive 6. So there's our answer there. With letter C here, which I'm just going to move up, I tried the GCF right away, but there isn't one. So what I notice now is that my A value is 1, my leading coefficient is just a 1, my B is negative 10, and my C value is 21. So those are nice and easy for us. I need to think of the numbers that would multiply to 21 and somehow add to be a negative 10. So here, if they multiply to be a positive, it's either a positive times a positive or a negative times a negative. But if they combine to be negative, that means I know I must have been dealing with only negatives. So between these two, the negative 3 and the negative 7, if I check my math there, would multiply to 21, and if I added them, I would get negative 10. So I'm going to use those numbers in my factors, x minus 3 and x minus 7. So this last one, we have 4 terms is what I noticed right away. So when we have 4 terms, we want to do factor by grouping. So I'm going to group the first 2 terms together. Their GCF is only an x. Looking at the next group of terms, they have a 2 in common. And by 2, I mean a positive 2. So I'm looking for my common factor, and I see that this is the same, so that's good. So that'll be one of my factors, x squared minus 4. And then the GCFs combine to make my second factor, which was an x and then a plus 2. Now with this one, though, I do need to go further, because this quadratic, if I read it as x squared plus 0x minus 4, that does factor further. I can think of the numbers that multiply to negative 4 and add to 0. So this one does go a little bit further for our final answer, and if we don't get all the way, we will not get full credit. So that it is required as our final answer. Make my 2 a little bit better. Now right away, I'm going to do the bonus. We're at a polynomial with 4 terms that factors using factor by grouping. So let's just use our work comparatively backwards. So I'm going to go ahead and put my answer to that right up here. So I'm going to start with something that looks like this. So I know that the end of factor by grouping just has 2 parentheses. Now, I don't want to do anything that factored into 3 or special, so I'm just going to change that to x squared plus 4 times x plus 2, because that could be the end of our factor by grouping. Now, from factor by grouping, what we know is that one of those parentheses was the common parenthesis right? That's what we saw here. This x squared minus 4 was the common parenthesis. So I'm just going to put that x squared plus 4 in my version in the common parentheses. And then going backwards, what we saw was that one of those numbers was the GCF in front of this group, and the other number was the GCF in front of this group. So we just got to put them back to get our original problem. So this could be something like x cubed plus 4x plus 2x squared plus 8. And again, that's just one variation of that, but there's many different answers.